Hey y'all, in this mini video, I'm going to show you how I make my cuff bending bracelet tool. Now I'm really only using this for the sole purpose of making my inlay cuff bracelets like you can see here. And this is also helpful for students that are taking my inlay cuff bracelet course online. Because usually the traditional way of, using a nylon or rawhide hammer on a bracelet mandrel can kind of potentially mangle your triangle wire for these inlay cuff bracelets. But to be honest, this is just a wonderful tool to get consistent cuff shape each time you use it. But even if you're not making inlay bracelets like I am, this is still a great tool to move really thick gauges of metal for any kind of cuff. You can find the full tool and materials list below for your ease, but I'll delve into them more in this video. As of December 2023, I calculated that you'll spend approximately $36 on raw material alone to make this tool yourself. And that's not including the tools and the drill bits and stuff that you'll need to do that. So if that does not sound ideal, I will have some in my shop as well, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. First, you'll need a 6-inch section of red oak, and I cut mine from a piece of 1x2 lumber. If you can't find red oak, just try to find the hardest wood you can. You could also get something like a 2x2 PVC baluster or some kind of PVC decking. And that's kind of nice because it's somewhat hard, yet it's plastic, so it won't hurt your jewelry. You also cut out 6-inch segments of 1 1/4 inch PVC, 1 inch PVC, and 1/2 inch PVC. I found small 2-foot portions of that at Lowe's. Then you can either just use a hacksaw to cut them, or you can do what I did here. I got a little miter box for under $20 just so I could have straighter cuts. I recommend using a clamp to hold things in place while you cut, since using that miter box, PVC wants to kind of slide back and forth. Even better if you have a miter saw, then you can kind of just zip these cuts out. Ignore the fact that I already drilled this since I got a little too excited and didn't video that part, but since I'm not a carpenter and my lengths for all my items weren't perfectly 6 inches, I made a little cardboard template that measures 4.5 inches long. I use this to make marks on my wood, and I'm just kind of eyeballing that the template is somewhat centered so that my holes will be consistently the same distance apart regardless of how poorly I cut my wood in PVC. So I made a little mark here, and then I'll also find the halfway point on the width as well so that I have like a kind of a little X to line up my drill bit right in the center. You'll use a 1/4 inch drill bit to make your holes. I used a drill press since that kind of ensured that my holes would be perfectly straight up and down. So if you're doing this by hand, you'll just have to be really careful since any slight deviation will make your bolts slant in kind of different directions, and that can impact whether or not you can slide your PVC pipes on the bolts easily. Now we'll have to make some countersink holes in the back so that the carriage bolts have something to rest in. In my drill press, I have a 5/8 inch spade bit to make that countersink. Just make sure that the bit is kind of nicely aligned with your previously drilled hole. Make sure you have everything clamped down and go down maybe about 1/4 inch. I honestly just kind of did it by eye, and that's fine since the bolt doesn't really need to be down all the way below the surface of the wood. So now when I go to test out my 4-inch long 1/4 inch carriage bolts, you can see that the square part of it is in the hole, which is perfect. You don't need the whole head hiding in the wood since we're going to do something here to ensure that the bolt doesn't twist while you're trying to tighten the tool down later on when you're using it. Inserting one bolt in at a time, I'll take a 2 to 3 pound hammer and hit the head of the carriage bolt until it starts to embed itself into the wood. When I take it out, it left a nice imprint that will kind of hold it in place while you're using the tool. To hold the bolt in more permanently, we'll also mix up a bit of epoxy a little later. Next, you'll use that same measuring template of 4.5 inches to make your marks on your PVC. It's hard to make a straight line on PVC, so I tried to align my template along the bottom of some letters so it'd be kind of somewhat straight. I also recommend using a pencil to mark the PVC. I found that just worked a lot better than permanent marker. Now we're ready to drill the holes in our PVC. This will be the hardest part since the holes need to be straight through the pipe, but PVC can be slippery to deal with. My friend Al made this great V-shaped vise for PVC, but any vise that will hold your piece steady will do the trick. This is where the drill press comes in handy to really get a nice clean drill through. I'm using a 5/16 drill bit for these holes, but I actually think that the 3/8 would have been better to have a little bit more wiggle room in your measurements, especially if you're doing this by hand. But you can always widen the hole out a little bit later if you need to, since the washer is going to help keep everything in place later when you're using the tool. Now I found this useful when you go to drill the hole in on the other side of the PVC, but I found a 1/4 inch wooden dowel in my studio. So what I did is I put that in my previous hole. I have my clamp loosely on my PVC so I can slide it back and forth until the dowel lines up with the drill bit when I look at it from the side. Then I can tighten my clamp when everything looks aligned and drill. But this really helped make really well-placed holes that would kind of slide right into the bolts easily. Once all your PVC is drilled and you tested them out to make sure they fit your bolts, mix up your epoxy, insert your bolt in, and then add a little bit of that epoxy to the bottom, maybe about a 1/4 inch from the bottom, before tapping it back in place and then cleaning up any epoxy that leaks out. You could just leave it to cure as is, or you could slide on one of your PVC followed by the washer and the wing nuts to hold everything nice and tight while it dries. Once the epoxy is dried, you're ready to use your tool. Do note that regardless of what wood you use for the base, whether it's hardwood or PVC wood, you will want to get a small piece of denim to double up or a piece of leather to protect it, since the triangle wire for at least the inlay cuffs that we'll bring in my inlay cuff bracelet course will cut into it over time if you don't, as you can see here. As far as some troubleshooting goes, because the holes in your PVC might be pretty precise, you want to evenly lower the PVC horizontally through the carriage bolts. If you don't, one side might get further down than the other, and then you'll have to kind of wrestle it a bit so it'll come loose again before trying again. You'll use the PVC tubes one at a time to get that refined curve of your cuff bracelet, working from the largest tube to the smallest. To be honest, I don't often use the 1/2 inch size piece, so that's optional, but it's cheap enough to get and just have it handy, and you may as well make it while you're at it anyways. I'll show my lapidary jeweler friends how to use this cuff bracelet bending tool in part 1 of my inlay cuff bracelet tutorial, and eventually I'll get around to making another video on YouTube for just general cuff bending, but I absolutely love to hear in the comments how you make this tool, and even if you make any kind of extra improvements on it or have any other tips for fellow makers on how to make this easier, especially if you're drilling by hand. Thanks again for watching, and good luck with your tool making!